At 89 years old, Mama Mabel sat alone on a wooden bench outside a rented room she never imagined she would live in. Her eyes could barely see. Her legs struggled to carry her weight. And the son she had waited 15 years to have could barely provide food for her. Sometimes she would sit quietly for hours, listening to the sounds of people passing by. Children going to school. Women returning from the market. Motorcycles speeding down the road. Life was moving forward for everyone else. But for Mama Mabel, life felt as though it had stopped years ago. The painful part was that she had not always lived this way. There was a time when people respected her. A time when relatives called her whenever they needed help. A time when children who were not even hers depended on her for school fees, food, and guidance. There was a time when she owned a comfortable house. A time when she believed she was building a future that would reward her sacrifices. Instead, she found herself growing old in regret. Regret over a son she loved too much. Regret over a young woman she helped raise. Regret over another young woman she pushed away. And regret over decisions that seemed harmless at the time but eventually changed everything. Whenever people heard her story, they always asked the same question. How did a woman who helped so many people end up with so little? The answer began many years earlier. Long before the blindness. Long before the poverty. Long before the loneliness. It began with a prayer. For 15 years, Mama Mabel and her husband David prayed for a child. Every year they hoped. Every year they waited. And every year they faced disappointment. The pain of childlessness followed them everywhere. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. Naming ceremonies became painful. Even innocent conversations could bring tears to Mama Mabel's eyes. Some relatives pitied her. Others judged her. A few openly suggested that David should marry another wife. But David refused. No matter how difficult things became, he stood beside his wife. Together they endured the whispers. Together they endured the shame. Together they endured the heartbreak. Then, after 15 long years, the miracle finally happened. Mama Mabel became pregnant. The news spread through the family like wildfire. People who had stopped believing suddenly started celebrating. When the baby arrived, it felt as though heaven had personally visited their home. They named him Kenneth. From the day he was born, Kenneth became the center of Mama Mabel's world. Nothing mattered more. Not money. Not comfort. Not even her own happiness. Everything revolved around her son. Whenever Kenneth cried, she rushed to him. Whenever Kenneth wanted something, she found a way to provide it. Whenever someone corrected Kenneth, she defended him. At first, nobody thought much about it. After all, he was a miracle child. The son she had waited 15 years to have. But what began as love slowly became something else. Something dangerous. Something that would eventually destroy everything she had spent years building. While Kenneth was growing up, another challenge was unfolding elsewhere in the family. Mama Mabel's younger sister was struggling. She had many children and very little money. The family lived in a crowded area where survival itself was a daily battle. Every visit broke Mama Mabel's heart. She would watch the children sharing clothes, sharing meals, sharing dreams that seemed far too big for their circumstances. One afternoon, during one of those visits, her eyes settled on the eldest daughter. The girl was intelligent, polite, and eager to learn. Something about her reminded Mama Mabel of herself. That day, she made a decision. A decision that would affect both of their lives forever. "I'm taking her with me," she said. Her younger sister stared at her. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. But Mama Mabel was serious. The girl's mother hesitated. Not because she didn't want help, but because giving up your child, even temporarily, is never easy. Still, she knew opportunities like this rarely came twice. Finally, she agreed. The little girl packed her belongings, said goodbye to her brothers and sisters, and followed Mama Mabel home. Her name was Amora. At first, everything felt strange. The neighborhood, the school, the routine, even the silence. Compared to the noisy environment she came from, Mama Mabel's home felt like another world. Slowly, Amora adjusted. Years passed. Mama Mabel paid her school fees, bought her uniforms, provided food, provided shelter, made sure she had opportunities that would have been impossible in her parents' home. To outsiders, it appeared that Amora had gained a second mother. And in many ways, she had. But there was something nobody talked about. Inside that house, there were two children. And two very different sets of rules. Kenneth was protected. Amora was corrected. When Kenneth made mistakes, excuses appeared. When Amora made mistakes, discipline followed. When Kenneth failed, someone rescued him. When Amora failed, she was expected to learn from it. As the years passed, the difference became impossible to ignore. Amora learned responsibility. Kenneth learned dependence. Amora learned discipline. Kenneth learned entitlement. Neither child understood what was happening. But life was quietly preparing them for two very different futures. And years later, the consequences would shock everyone. As the years passed, Kenneth and Amora grew up under the same roof. To outsiders, they looked like brother and sister. They attended school, shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and sat together during family gatherings. But living in the same house did not mean they experienced the same childhood. By the time Kenneth reached his teenage years, people had already begun noticing certain habits. He disliked being corrected. He wanted things his way. And whenever he faced consequences for his actions, Mama Mabel would quickly come to his defense. Sometimes teachers complained. Sometimes neighbors complained. Sometimes relatives complained. The response was always the same. He's still young. He'll change. Leave him alone. The years went by, but Kenneth never really changed. Instead, he became more comfortable expecting life to bend around him. Amora watched all of this quietly. She was younger than Kenneth, but she noticed things. She noticed that he rarely accepted responsibility. She noticed that he preferred shortcuts. And she noticed that whenever trouble came, someone else usually cleaned up the mess. At the same time, Amora was learning very different lessons. Mama Mabel expected excellence from her. Good grades, respect, responsibility, hard work. Sometimes the expectations felt unfair. Especially when she watched Kenneth get away with things she could never get away with. There were moments when resentment tried to grow inside her. Moments when she questioned why she was treated differently. But there was another truth she could not ignore. Without Mama Mabel, her life would have been very different. She knew that. And because she knew it, she kept pushing forward. Years later, that discipline would become one of the greatest gifts she ever received. Around this same time, another young woman began appearing more frequently in their lives. Her name was Laura. Unlike many people who entered and left Kenneth's life, Laura stayed. At first, she was simply a friend. Then a close friend. Then something more. Before long, everyone knew they were in a relationship. Nobody seemed surprised. The two of them had known each other for years. And unlike Kenneth, Laura had clear goals. She worked hard. She respected people. And she treated relationships seriously. Whenever she visited the house, she greeted Mama Mabel respectfully. She helped where she could. She treated David like a father. And she treated Amora like a younger sister. Little by little, she became part of the family. Soon, it felt strange whenever she wasn't around. People began assuming marriage was only a matter of time. Even Mama Mabel seemed pleased. After all, Laura appeared to be everything a family could want. Responsible, respectful, loyal, and willing to stand by Kenneth despite his many flaws. But sometimes the people who love us the most are also the people we take for granted. And nobody took Laura more for granted than Kenneth. As the relationship continued, Kenneth's weaknesses became harder to ignore. He enjoyed attention from other women. He spent money carelessly. He talked about success more than he worked for it. Whenever opportunities appeared, he often abandoned them halfway. Laura saw these flaws. Of course she did. She wasn't blind. But love has a way of making people believe tomorrow will be better than today. Whenever Kenneth disappointed her, she forgave him. Whenever he made promises he couldn't keep, she gave him another chance. Whenever he stumbled, she helped him get back up. She believed he would eventually mature. She believed he would eventually become the man she knew he could be. Unfortunately, Kenneth had become too comfortable being rescued. And comfort rarely produces growth. While all this was happening, David was quietly becoming concerned. Unlike Mama Mabel, he could see where Kenneth's behavior was leading. Several times he tried speaking to his son. Sometimes gently. Sometimes firmly. But Kenneth rarely listened. The older he became, the more stubborn he became. One evening, after Kenneth had once again wasted an opportunity, David sat outside the house with him. The old man looked tired. Not angry. Just tired. Kenneth, he said softly, life doesn't reward people forever. One day you must stand on your own feet. Kenneth nodded. But his mind was elsewhere. Like many young people, he believed there would always be more time. More opportunities. More chances. David watched his son and felt a sadness he couldn't explain. He feared that life would one day teach Kenneth lessons he had refused to learn from his parents. And sadly, that fear would prove true. Not long afterward, David's health began to decline. At first, nobody panicked. A hospital visit here. Medication there. A few tests. A few treatments. Everyone assumed he would recover. But the months passed. And instead of improving, David became weaker. The hospital visits became more frequent. The medical bills became larger. The worry inside the family grew heavier. Mama Mabel was terrified. For years, David had been her partner. The man who stood beside her through 15 childless years. The man who never abandoned her. The thought of losing him felt unbearable. And during this difficult period, one person became almost impossible to ignore. Laura. Whenever the family needed support, she appeared. When there was a hospital appointment, she volunteered to help. When medications were needed, she contributed what she could. When Mama Mabel cried, Laura comforted her. When Kenneth felt overwhelmed, Laura encouraged him. Nobody forced her to do these things. Nobody demanded them. She did them because she cared. Deeply. There were days when she left work exhausted and still went straight to the hospital. There were days when she used money meant for herself to solve family problems. There were days when she sacrificed her own comfort to ease someone else's pain. Amora noticed every single sacrifice. So did David. And sometimes, lying quietly in his hospital bed, David would watch Laura moving around the room helping everyone. The old man understood something many others did not. Loyal people are rare. And when life places one in your path, you should protect them. Unfortunately, not everyone in the family understood that lesson. And very soon, they were about to learn it the hard way. As David's condition worsened, the atmosphere inside the family changed completely. The laughter that once filled the house became rare. Conversations became shorter. Worry seemed to sit quietly in every room. Some nights, Mama Mabel barely slept. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling, praying for another miracle. After all, God had given her Kenneth after 15 years. Surely he would not take David away. At least, that was what she hoped. But life does not always follow our hopes. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult hospital visit, Laura sat beside Mama Mabel in the waiting area. The older woman looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Mama Mabel quietly asked a question. What if he doesn't make it? Laura reached for her hand. He will be okay, Mama. But even as she spoke, she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The truth was becoming harder to ignore. David was running out of strength. Weeks later, the call everyone feared finally came. David was gone. The news hit the family like a storm. Mama Mabel collapsed into tears. The man who had walked beside her through every major chapter of her life was gone. Her companion. Her protector. Her closest friend. Gone. Kenneth cried. Amara cried. Relatives filled the house. Condolences came from every direction. For days, people arrived and departed. Some came because they genuinely cared. Others came because that is what people do when death visits a family. Through it all, Lara remained present. She helped organize things. She comforted guests. She assisted wherever she could. Even during her own grief, she focused on helping others. And when the funeral finally ended and most people returned to their normal lives, Lara stayed. She did not disappear when the difficult work began. She remained beside the family. That was when many people started seeing her not just as Kenneth's girlfriend, but as a future wife. Someone who had already proven herself. Someone who had already shown loyalty. Someone who had already demonstrated what commitment looked like. Unfortunately, loyalty is often appreciated most by those who have never had it. And Kenneth was about to make a decision that would cost him dearly. After David's death, instead of becoming more responsible, Kenneth seemed to become even more restless. He wanted quick success. Quick money. Quick solutions. He spent more time dreaming than building. More time talking than doing. And Mama Mabel, still grieving her husband, paid less attention than she should have. She was emotionally exhausted. The family was vulnerable. And that was when Tessa entered the picture. Unlike Laura, Tessa was not deeply connected to the family. She was focused on her own future. She had ambitions. Plans. Goals. For years, she had been working toward relocating to Europe. The process was difficult, but she was determined. By the time Kenneth met her, most of the hard work had already been done. She only needed a few final steps before leaving Nigeria. At first, nobody saw a problem. Kenneth and Tessa spoke occasionally. Then more frequently. Then constantly. Little by little, his attention drifted away from Laura. The woman who had stood beside him through years of struggle was suddenly receiving less attention than a woman preparing to leave the country. Amora noticed immediately. She noticed the phone calls. The secretive conversations. The sudden excitement whenever Tessa's name came up. Most importantly, she noticed how differently Kenneth treated Laura. The change was impossible to miss. Laura noticed it too. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe grief had changed Kenneth. Maybe time would fix everything. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The man she loved was slowly slipping away. One evening, Amara decided she could no longer stay silent. She approached Kenneth directly. "What are you doing?" she asked. Kenneth frowned. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." He avoided her eyes. Amara continued. Laura has been here for years. She stood by this family when many people disappeared. Don't throw that away. Kenneth laughed. Not because he found it funny, but because he didn't want to hear the truth. You worry too much. Amora stared at him. You think people like Laura are easy to find? Kenneth shrugged. At that moment, Amora felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Not for herself. For him. Because she realized Kenneth didn't understand what he was risking. A few days later, she tried speaking to Mama Mabel. Surely Mama would understand. Surely Mama would remember everything Laura had done. Surely Mama would intervene. Instead, the conversation left her shocked. Mama Mabel listened quietly. Then she dismissed the concern. Maybe you're exaggerating. Amora couldn't believe what she was hearing. Exaggerating. Mama, Laura practically carried this family through some of its hardest moments. I know, Mama Mabel replied. But people move on. Those words stayed with Amora long after the conversation ended. Because for the first time, she realized something painful. Mama Mabel was no longer looking at Laura through the eyes of gratitude. She was looking at the future through the eyes of opportunity. The possibility of Europe had captured her imagination. And once that happened, loyalty started losing value. From that moment forward, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Arguments became frequent. Misunderstandings multiplied. The tension inside the house became impossible to ignore. Laura felt it every day. The family she once considered her second home no longer felt welcoming. The smiles became fewer. The warmth disappeared. And slowly, painfully, she began understanding the truth. She was being replaced. Not because she had done something terrible. Not because she had betrayed anyone. But because someone else appeared to offer more advantages. And that realization broke her heart. Because nothing hurts quite like discovering that years of loyalty can be forgotten when people become distracted by what they think is a better opportunity. For weeks, Laura fought against the truth. She did not want to believe that everything she had built with Kenneth was falling apart. She remembered the years they had spent together. The promises. The plans. The sacrifices. The dreams they once shared. Surely all of that had to mean something. Surely it could not all disappear because another woman had entered the picture. But every day brought fresh evidence. Kenneth became colder. More distant. More impatient. Conversations that once lasted hours now ended within minutes. Messages went unanswered. Excuses became common. And whenever Laura tried to discuss the future, Kenneth seemed uncomfortable. As though the future they once planned together no longer interested him. The hardest part was not the rejection. It was the confusion. Because nobody had the courage to tell her the truth directly. Instead, they allowed her to slowly discover it herself. One painful clue at a time. One disappointment at a time. One betrayal at a time. Even then, Laura tried to hold on. She believed that if she loved Kenneth enough, things would return to normal. But love cannot save a relationship when only one person is fighting for it. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. The arguments became impossible to ignore. The tension became unbearable. And one day, Laura finally understood what everyone else already knew. She was no longer wanted there. The realization shattered her. Not because she was losing a boyfriend, but because she was losing a family. She had spent years loving those people. Years supporting them. Years treating their struggles as her own. Now she was standing outside the circle she had helped build. And nobody seemed willing to stop it. Amora watched everything happen. Inside, she was furious. Not only because Laura was being treated unfairly, but because she knew exactly what Kenneth and Mama Mabel were throwing away. She remembered the hospital visits, the sacrifices, the loyalty, the kindness. And she knew that one day they would regret this decision. Unfortunately, some lessons can only be learned through pain. The day Laura packed her belongings felt unreal. Every room carried memories. Every corner reminded her of moments she wished she could forget. She folded her clothes slowly, carefully, almost as if she hoped someone would stop her. No one did. She looked around the house one final time. The house where she had laughed, cried, dreamed, and loved. Then she picked up her bags and walked away. Without shouting, without revenge, without drama. She simply left. And with her went something that family would never recover. Years later, Mama Mabel would think about that day more times than she could count. Because hindsight has a cruel way of showing us what gratitude should have revealed much earlier. For a while, everything appeared to work in Kenneth's favor. Tessa successfully completed her relocation process. Before long, she left Nigeria and settled in Europe. Kenneth was excited. Mama Mabel was excited. To them, it felt as though the future had finally arrived. The future they had imagined. The future they had chosen over Laura. For months, Kenneth spoke about Europe constantly. He imagined opportunities, money, success, a completely different life. But there was one major problem. Those dreams depended entirely on someone else's plans. And Tessa had her own life to build. Once she settled abroad, reality began replacing fantasy. She had work to do, responsibilities to handle, challenges of her own. She could not spend every day focusing on Kenneth. Nor did she want to. At first, communication remained regular. Then it became less frequent. Then less frequent again. The distance between them grew. Not just physically, emotionally. The excitement that once fueled the relationship slowly disappeared. Meanwhile, Tessa continued progressing. She worked, saved, invested, and eventually began helping her own family. Over the years, she built a house for them. She supported relatives. She created a life for herself. Whenever she returned to Nigeria, she spent time with her family. But one thing became increasingly clear. She no longer viewed Kenneth as an important part of her future. The man who once imagined she would change his life discovered something painful. Tessa had never been planning her future around him. She had been planning her future around herself. And there is a big difference. The realization it Kenneth had. The dream he had chosen over Laura was slipping away. The future he had imagined was disappearing. Yet by then, it was far too late. Laura was gone. And unlike some people, she did not spend her life looking backward. She focused on moving forward. Slowly, she rebuilt herself. She rebuilt her confidence. She rebuilt her future. Eventually, she met someone else. Someone who appreciated her loyalty. Someone who valued her sacrifices. Someone who saw her worth. Years later, she married. She became a wife. Then a mother. The happiness she once hoped to find with Kenneth arrived through another path entirely. Back in Nigeria, Kenneth's situation continued worsening. One opportunity after another failed. One plan after another collapsed. The discipline required to build lasting success still escaped him. And without realizing it, he was beginning to experience the consequences of choices he had spent years avoiding. Meanwhile, Amara continued moving in the opposite direction. The same discipline she learned growing up was now paying off. She completed university, completed her service year, and began building a life of her own. The little girl who once arrived carrying a small bag was becoming a successful woman. Mama Mabel watched her progress with pride. Despite their complicated relationship, she genuinely wanted Amora to succeed. After all, she had invested years of effort into helping her reach that point. Then came the day everyone had been waiting for. Amora announced that she was getting married. The family celebrated. Relatives gathered. Plans were made. Excitement filled the air. And deep inside, Mama Mabel felt something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. She remembered bringing Amora home as a child. She remembered the school fees, the sacrifices, the struggles. And now she would watch her walk into a new chapter of life. What she did not know was that the wedding would leave behind a wound she would never completely forget. The wedding day arrived with music, laughter, and celebration. Family members traveled from different cities. Old friends reunited. Photographers moved from table to table capturing memories. For most people in attendance, it was simply another beautiful wedding. For Mama Mabel, it felt like something much deeper. It felt like the reward for years of sacrifice. As she sat among the guests, her mind drifted through memories. She remembered the small frightened girl who had arrived at her house carrying a single bag. She remembered buying school uniforms. She remembered paying fees. She remembered helping with assignments. She remembered the countless times she had worried about Amora's future. Looking at the beautiful bride, she felt emotional. Perhaps too emotional. Because in her heart, she had never truly seen Amora as just a niece. Part of her had always seen her as the daughter she never had. The ceremony continued beautifully. Then came a moment nobody expected. An announcement was made. The parents of the bride were invited forward. Without thinking, Mama Mabel rose from her seat. Her heart was full. Her emotions had taken control. For a brief moment, she genuinely believed she was being called. After all, she had spent most of Amora's life acting as a parent. Slowly, she began walking toward the front. Several guests smiled. Some watched quietly. Then someone stopped her. There had been a misunderstanding. The organizers were calling for Amora's biological parents. Not her. The words landed like a slap. The room suddenly felt too bright. Too loud. Too crowded. Embarrassed, Mama Mabel turned around and walked back to her seat. The ceremony continued. The music played. The guests celebrated. But something inside her had shifted. A wound had opened. One she tried desperately to hide. No one noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. No one noticed the pain she carried home that evening. She smiled for photographs, congratulated the newlyweds, and behaved as though everything was fine. But deep inside, she felt forgotten. For days afterward, the incident replayed inside her mind. Again and again. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself she should be happy for Amora. She told herself many things. Yet the pain refused to leave. Still, life moved on. Months later, exciting news arrived. Amora was expecting a child. Everyone was happy. Preparations began immediately. Family members discussed names. Baby clothes were purchased. Plans were made. Then one day, Amora called Mama Mabel personally. "Mama, I want you to come." Those simple words filled her heart with joy. Perhaps this was the moment she had been waiting for. A chance to feel appreciated again. A chance to bond with the baby. A chance to enjoy the role she had always imagined for herself. Without hesitation, she agreed. When the baby arrived, Mama Mabel traveled to help. Like many elderly women during Omogo, she threw herself completely into the responsibility. She woke up before everyone else. Prepared meals. Cleaned. Bathed the baby. Helped the new mother rest. And handled countless tasks nobody else wanted to do. Day after day. Week after week. She worked tirelessly. She never complained. Even when her body ached. Even when she was tired. Even when she felt unappreciated. She convinced herself it was worth it. Because family was family. When it was finally time to return home, she packed her things quietly. She expected nothing extravagant. Nothing unreasonable. Just a little appreciation. A little recognition. Something that would show her efforts had mattered. Instead, she left feeling disappointed. Very disappointed. The appreciation she received felt small compared to the work she had done. But she kept those feelings mostly to herself. She returned home and tried to move on. Then came the painful discovery. Not long after she left, Amora's biological mother arrived. The younger sister. The woman who had originally allowed Amora to live with Mama Mabel. And according to neighbors and relatives who later discussed it, the experience was completely different. She stayed comfortably. She was treated generously. She received gifts, support, money, attention. Everything seemed easier. Everything seemed bigger. Everything seemed better. When Mama Mabel heard the details, her heart sank. The comparison was impossible to avoid. She remembered the long weeks she had spent helping. The sacrifices she had made. The effort she had invested. Yet somehow, she felt as though she had received less appreciation than the woman who arrived later. The disappointment stayed with her. Not because she wished her sister badly, but because she felt invisible. Once again, she found herself asking a painful question. Had all her sacrifices really mattered? While those thoughts occupied her mind, another problem was quietly growing. Kenneth. The son she loved more than anything. The son she had protected for decades. The son she had excused again and again. His life was falling apart. The opportunities he once dreamed about never materialized. The success he expected never arrived. The discipline required to build wealth was still missing. And one poor decision continued leading to another. Money came. Money disappeared. Opportunities came. Opportunities disappeared. Nothing lasted. Nothing grew. Nothing remained. Then came the decision that changed everything. One afternoon, Kenneth informed his mother that he intended to sell the family house. The announcement shocked her. At first, she thought he was joking. Surely he couldn't be serious. That house represented decades of sacrifice. Years of memories. Years of hard work. Years of family history. But Kenneth was serious. He believed selling it would solve their. At first, Mama Mabel tried to remain hopeful. A new city. A new beginning. Perhaps Kenneth was right. Perhaps selling the house would create opportunities they had not seen before. Perhaps life would improve. For a few months, she held on to that belief. Then reality arrived. The money from the house began disappearing. Little by little. Expense after expense. Decision after decision. Until one day, Mama Mabel looked around and realized something frightening. There was very little to show for it. No thriving business. No investment. No stable source of income. No long-term plan. Just promises. The same promises she had been hearing for years. Only now, there was no house left to fall back on. The safety net was gone. And for the first time in her life, fear settled permanently in her heart. Kenneth was no longer a young man. He was supposed to be the person taking care of her. The person protecting her. The person carrying the family forward. Instead, she found herself worrying about him the same way she worried about him when he was a teenager. Only now the consequences were far greater. Years passed. The situation became harder. Money became scarce. The lifestyle Mama Mabel once knew disappeared completely. Some days were manageable. Other days were difficult. Very difficult. Then came the health problems. At first, it was her legs. Walking became painful. Simple tasks became exhausting. Standing for long periods became almost impossible. Soon afterward, her eyesight began deteriorating. Slowly at first. Then rapidly. The world around her became blurry. Faces became shadows. Distances became difficult to judge. Eventually, she could barely see at all. Doctors were consulted. Treatments were discussed. But treatment requires money. And money was becoming something Kenneth struggled to provide. The irony was heartbreaking. The woman who had once helped pay school fees for others now struggled to pay for her own medical care. The woman who once fed hungry relatives now worried about food herself. The woman who once opened her home to others now depended entirely on a son who could barely manage his own life. Sometimes she sat quietly in darkness. Not because the lights were off, but because her eyes could no longer see what was around her. In those moments, memories became her closest companions. She remembered David, the man who had stood beside her through 15 painful years of childlessness. She remembered the day Kenneth was born. The joy, the celebration, the tears. She remembered bringing Amora home, a frightened little girl from a crowded neighborhood. She remembered school fees, Christmas clothes, report cards, family gatherings. She remembered everything. And then, almost inevitably, her thoughts would drift toward Laura, the woman who had once loved their family with all her heart. Years earlier, Mama Mabel had convinced herself that Laura would always be there. That if they ever needed her, they could simply call. That loyalty would wait forever. She was wrong. One day, after months of hesitation, Kenneth attempted to reach out. Not because he suddenly remembered Laura, but because life had become difficult. Very difficult. By then, he had heard that Laura was doing well. She was married. She had children. She had built the kind of stable life she once hoped to build with him. Kenneth tried calling. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Messages were ignored. The chapter had closed years ago. Laura had moved on. And she had every right to. When Mama Mabel learned about the failed attempts, she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Around the same period, she occasionally thought about Amora. The little girl she raised. The little girl she disciplined. The little girl she helped through primary school, secondary school, university, and NYSC. She wondered if Amora thought about her too. Sometimes Amora called. Sometimes she didn't. Life was busy. Children were growing. Responsibilities were increasing. And although there was still communication, it was not the kind of relationship Mama Mabel once imagined. Perhaps that hurt. Perhaps it didn't. At her age, many disappointments had already blended together. One evening, while sitting outside her home, she overheard two women talking nearby. They did not know she could hear them. One woman said, "It's sad what happened to her." The other replied, "Life is like that. You reap what you sow." The words stung. Not because they were completely wrong, but because they were only partly right. Yes, Mama Mabel had made mistakes. Serious mistakes. She had favored her son. She had excused bad behavior. She had ignored warnings. She had hurt people. But that was not the whole story. The whole story was more complicated. She had also sacrificed. She had also helped. She had also loved. She had also given opportunities to children who were not hers. Human beings are rarely all good or all bad. Most people are a mixture of both. And Mama Mabel was no exception. As the years continued passing, her world became smaller. Friends died. Neighbors relocated. Relatives became distant. The phone rang less often. Visitors became rare. The days became quieter. And the quiet gave her too much time to think. Think about choices. Think about consequences. Think about roads not taken. Sometimes she wondered what life would have looked like if she had disciplined Kenneth properly when he was young. What if she had allowed him to face consequences? What if she had taught him responsibility instead of rescuing him? What if she had demanded accountability instead of offering excuses? Would he have become a different man? Would their lives have been different? Nobody knew. And nobody ever would. Because life only gives us one chance to make most decisions. There are no practice rounds. No rewinds. No second versions. Only consequences. One afternoon, as the sun began setting, Mama Mabel reached for Kenneth's hand. Her voice was weak. Much weaker than it once was. Kenneth. Yes, Mama. I loved you too much. Kenneth looked at her, confused. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then tears filled the old woman's eyes. I protected you when I should have corrected you. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy. Painful. True. Kenneth lowered his head. Because deep inside, he knew she was right. The greatest gift a parent can give a child is not endless protection. It is preparation. Preparation for hardship. Preparation for responsibility. Preparation for life. And somewhere along the way, that lesson had been forgotten. As darkness settled over the evening sky, Mama Mabel sat quietly beside her son. The son she waited 15 years to have. The son she loved with everything she had. The son who became both her greatest blessing and her greatest regret. And perhaps that was the tragedy of her story. Not that she loved him, but that she confused love with indulgence. She gave him comfort when he needed correction. Protection when he needed accountability. Excuses when he needed discipline. And by the time she understood the difference, both of them had already paid the price. The little girl she raised built her own life. The woman she pushed away found happiness elsewhere. The husband who once guided the family was gone. And the future she imagined had disappeared long ago. All that remained were memories. Memories and lessons. Lessons written not in books, but in consequences. Because sometimes the people we refuse to correct become the people least prepared for life. Sometimes loyalty is recognized only after it is lost. And sometimes the harvest we gather in old age comes from seeds planted decades earlier. Mama Mabel's story was not the story of a wicked woman. Nor was it the story of a perfect woman. It was the story of a human being. A woman who loved imperfectly. A woman who made mistakes. A woman who made mistakes. A woman who helped some people, hurt others, and spent her final years understanding the difference. And if her story leaves us with one lesson, perhaps it is this. Love the people around you. Appreciate those who stand by you during difficult times. Correct your children before life is forced to do it for you. And never trade genuine loyalty for the promise of something that only looks better from a distance. Because some people live and can never be replaced. And some regrets stay long after every opportunity to fix them is gone. That was the story of Mama Mabel. A story of love. A story of sacrifice. A story of gratitude. A story of regret. And above all, a story of consequences. Years later, people still spoke about Mama Mabel's story. Not because she was rich. Not because she was famous. But because almost everyone who heard her story could see a little bit of their own family inside it. Some saw a parent who loved too much. Some saw a child who was given everything but valued nothing. Some saw themselves in Amora. Some saw themselves in Lara. And some quietly wondered whether they were making the same mistakes in their own homes. One rainy afternoon, a woman who had known Mama Mabel for many years was asked a simple question. What was Mama Mabel really like? The woman thought for a moment before answering. She wasn't a bad person. Then what happened? The woman sighed. She loved with her heart but forgot to use her head. The answer stayed with everyone who heard it. Because it was true. Mama Mabel was not remembered for cruelty. She was remembered for choices. Choices made out of love. Choices made out of fear. Choices made out of hope. And like all choices, they eventually produced results. The choices we make today do not disappear tomorrow. They grow. They follow us. And eventually, they become the life we live. What do you think? Was Mama Mabel a victim of her own choices, or was life simply unfair to her? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening to Whispers with ISI.